single day, like I've always done and always will.
Passing these bills on the floor, making yet another stand.
Welcome to this week's edition of New York Now. I'm Chantel Destra. This week at the Capitol, state lawmakers convened for the General Budget Conference Committee meeting. The meeting, which is more of a budget formality, is meant to provide transparency of the budget process for New Yorkers.
I am really happy that you are joining us today for this year's General Conference Committee, or as we affectionately call it, the Mothership.
When asked about the budget conversations with legislative leaders, Governor Kathy Hochul indicated that the conversations were headed in a productive direction.
It is very respectful. There's a lot of listening, and this is not the first time I've sat down with the leaders since last year. We've been having ongoing dialogue, so I've been able to share my priorities, and my budget is the blueprint. I laid out my highest priorities and what I want to get accomplished. So they know that. Certainly the one houses give them their option to put forth some of their ideas and priorities. That's part of the process. But I feel like we're going to have a very productive session.
Legislative leaders and the governor have about 2 weeks to come to an agreement for the final state budget. We'll continue to bring you updates on their progress right here on the show. Now turning to another important topic. According to the governor's office, the number of minority and women-owned business enterprises in New York have been consistently growing for the last 4 years. In this next segment, we sat down with Assemblymember Rodneyse Bichotte Hermelyn to discuss the ways that the state can continue to provide support for those businesses. Here's that conversation. Thank you so much for joining us here today, Assemblymember.
Thank you for having me.
Now, I'm super excited to speak with you about minority and women-owned business enterprises. I know that you've been a huge champion of these businesses and even chairing that committee in the Assembly. So can you tell me some of the work that your conference is doing this year to support those businesses?
Well, for one, I would say that we made great progress last year. And because of those progresses, we are able to make more upgrades and changes. Last year, we were able to do a number of things. It was record-breaking. We increased the threshold to 1.5 million in the city and 750,000 in the state. So this year, what we want to do, we want to bring the state up to 1.5 million, very similar to the city. We were able to also expand a mentorship program across the city of New York, where minority and women business enterprise can work with these agencies, go through a program, and after they graduate, they will be listed as a priority list, a priority business to work with the agency, almost kind of guaranteeing them like $1.5 to $2 million in contract. So that's a big start. We also did OSIP-CSIP, which is an insurance owner's insurance, where the MWBEs, they can work with the agencies, the general contractors, in getting wholesale at a discounted rate, wholesale insurance. Mm-hmm. So that was a barrier for many of the businesses because they could not afford the insurances. And now we have a platform, we have resources along with capital that can help them get into the field of bidding and providing subcontracting businesses with the agencies. So we're very excited about that. Yeah. Now this year, we're taking those progresses and we want to do more, okay? We want to do more in terms of not only increasing the threshold, but we also want to expand a mentorship program across the state, not just the city, so that these big agencies like DASNY, Department of Transportation, the State Education Department, any type of big construction work that's happening, whether it's local roads, whether it's highways and so forth, we want these businesses to work with those agencies, learn how to do business, learn how to lay the groundwork, learn how to bid, learn how to estimate, so that they can take part of the New York State MWBE program. Both the city and the state procures billions of dollars, over 20, 30 billions of dollars of contracts to vendors, and certainly with the population of women and minorities being the majority, we feel that it's an opportunity for them to participate at a higher rate. 5% for a very long time was the utilization rate, which is the rate of contracts awarded. That was, the trend for a lot of these minority and women-owned businesses. But over the course of the years, it has grown. The city has reached a 30%, as well as the state. Right. So we're very excited about that, and we just want to continue that trajectory.
Yeah, and along with those measures, you also sponsor a bill that would essentially require contracting agencies to contact those businesses when they're listed on utilization plans and when a contract is awarded. So I'm curious, what were you hearing from those business owners about what they were dealing with that prompted you to introduce this legislation?
Yeah, so this bill essentially will pretty much guide the contractors on how to utilize the subcontractors. So first of all, notification like, hey, you've been awarded, you've been enlisted to participate in this particular bid, and these are the steps to make sure that you are successful. Very often, a lot of these small businesses are not even notified that a bid is available. And then when it is available, they still need some type of hand-holding, in a sense, to make sure that they're successful. One of the things that we've been hearing from the MWBEs is that when they do get into these contracts, they're not getting paid on time, even though the general contractors are getting paid by the agencies, they're still not getting in time. So this bill is a comprehensive bill that will kind of walk them through the whole process and ensure that they do get paid for the work that they do. We have other types of bills that we're also introducing, like the prompt payment bill, and which expands not only to MWBEs but to all small businesses and subcontractors who are also facing those challenges. Very often, when you get into a bid and then you expend costs and expenses, paying your employees, and you're still not getting paid, it takes the businesses out of business. We've seen that happen over and over, and that's not the whole point of the program. The whole point of the program is to make sure that these businesses survive and be fruitful and grow, because when you grow, we create more jobs, and it's better for the economy. There's an economic flow. So, this bill, we hope that it will pass this year. We have a number of other MWBE bills that we definitely want to push to enforce the program.
Mm-hmm. And given the time that we're in, where we're seeing record inflation and the possibility of tariffs on materials coming from other countries, how are you hoping to work with the legislature to help these businesses combat these challenges?
Well, that's going to be a problem. Currently, right now, as you hear from our president, there are tariffs that's going to be imposed on major countries that many of our construction bids rely on as far as materials. So, for example, steel. We depend on China for steel. Steel is going to be very expensive, and so it's going to impact who can work on the project, if the project is even affordable. And it will increase if we're building homes and houses and apartment complex. Those costs would then be transferred to the consumer. And even the president, the Prime Minister of Canada, he said it. He said, "Hey, this is not a tariff on the American people. It's the government, our government, who imposed a tariff on them, and as a result, they're imposing a tariff on us." So that's going to be a big impact on our overall economy, how we're going to afford this. So with that said, we're hoping that the federal government will be able to work with the different states and subsidize some of these costs that are being imposed, because if we can't build. We can't improve our roads. It will be very, very difficult, and we have a lot of jobs on the line. We want to make sure that America is working.
And given those challenges, what would you say to potential business owners who may be wary about starting a business given the state of the economy? How would you bring awareness to the benefits of the minority and women-owned business enterprises and having that state certificate?
Well, for one, we definitely want to make these small businesses aware, okay? Very often they are not aware of the resources that are already available. So when I look at, let's say, the small business services, they have a number of different workshops that can teach them how to bid, how to work with the government. There are resources, there are capital dollars and everything where alternative finance institutions can lend at a very a low interest rate or at a no interest rate cost, which would help these small businesses. We have a number of investors who are willing to invest in some of these small businesses. So there's a lot of resources that people don't know. And so what we want to do is to bring a lot of these resources into these neighborhoods. Very often people are not going to travel to Manhattan or to a particular place. So we want to work with the nonprofits to help explain, hold their hands in terms of what are the things that are required to be certified. Bookkeeping is very challenging for a lot of the small businesses, keeping their paperwork, their taxes, their expenses. A lot of them may not know how to do an accountant. So there are resources that can help these small businesses organize their bookkeeping so that they're in a position to not only be certified, but be qualified to bid on a project.
Are there any misconceptions about the process that you've had to debunk through the years when it comes to these small businesses?
Yeah, I think a lot of the small businesses have been, they felt discouraged because they feel that they've done everything that they need to do, but still are not getting any calls. And what I would encourage them is to, get in the face of the people who are making decisions in the agencies, go to the networking events, match up with larger, bigger companies who are looking for partnerships with subcontractors. So, it takes a lot to engage and build relationships. So those are some of the things that many of the small businesses are not doing because they don't have time. They're trying to keep their businesses afloat. So really trying to be in the face and get to know what's out there, what kind of bids that they can partner with.
And according to the state, the number of small businesses has exceeded for the 4th consecutive year. So what do you think is driving that growth?
I think the programs that we have been providing, for example, like the 1.5 million threshold, has increased the number of small businesses, 30-40%, millions of dollars. It's increased tremendously, just because these businesses had an opportunity to get selected and to do work. So programs like that are lifting the barriers are certainly contributing to the successes of these businesses growing and increasing.
And what is your vision for, the committee and for these businesses in the next 5 to 10 years? Like, where are you hoping that everything lands?
Well, I'm hoping that the businesses get to a point where it's fully diversified in different areas. So we have like construction related, service related. We would like to see minority and women-owned businesses capitalize and exceed in their goals in each of those areas. Very often, the construction-related, you don't see many of the minority or women-owned businesses succeeding because it's an area that requires a lot of capital, materials, things of that nature, which is very costly, and you need working capital. Whereas you would probably see a little bit more success in like a service area or like an education, type industry or so forth. So what we want to see more of the minority women business enterprise exceeding in each of those areas, and we would like to see more women of color doing very well. I mean, they're really at the bottom of the barrel when it comes to percentage for MWBE.
So how do you bridge the gap in terms of bringing those businesses to those untapped industries right now?
Well, again, it's networking. It's doing legislation that will address underrepresented minority and women business enterprise. It's policy changes. It's again awareness. It's awareness. Encouraging a lot of these businesses that are not tapped to, and having success stories.
Yeah. And lastly, it's no secret that affordability is the big focus this legislative session. So what does your vision of affordability look like, and how are you hoping to have these businesses be in line with your vision for affordability?
Well, it's a comprehensive thing, right? Okay, so from a housing standpoint, we certainly want to subsidize projects that will allow real affordable rates for regular people to live. You first need a stable place. And, we're looking at, and we've been always talking about the area income needs to be matched with the local zip code and not on a national level. So, things like that. Okay, well, what does this community, what does affordability mean for this particular community? As it relates to wages, we're always fighting to increase wages. It should be probably, minimum wage should be $25, $30 an hour. But it does impose a burden on many of the very small businesses. But we have waivers for the smaller businesses so that they can build up to be at a point where they can pay those wages that are definitely in need. And when you talk about tax credit, I do have a bill that we're going to be introducing on the city level, which is it's called Axe the Tax, which gives tax credit to many of the working families at a certain threshold. Those obviously who are making a certain income, and that is supposed to bring like $65 million back in the pockets of workers. And and those little things help, because that's a difference in being able to pay a tuition, or being able to pay rent, or even being able to afford to buy things that you need, food or clothes and stuff like that. So that's something that is also being done on the state that I'm a co-sponsor of. So Axing the Tax, affording tax credits to the working family class, it's a big thing. So affordability is on a wide spectrum, whether it's housing, whether it's small businesses creating jobs, or whether it's working families being able to get more dollars in their pockets in their tax returns. So it's a comprehensive effort.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today, Assemblymember. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today, but we really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
And we were speaking with Assemblymember Rodneyse Bichotte Hermelyn. And for more information and resources for minority and women-owned business enterprises, you can visit our website. That's at nynow.org. Now turning to another important topic. This month marks 5 years since the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a pandemic. The shutdowns have long since ended, but the impacts on society are still being understood. Beyond the deaths and the long-term illness, the pandemic disrupted how we work, learn, and even eat. The New York Public News Network is marking the anniversary with a special series. Here on New York Now, we'll be diving into the long-term impact of the COVID-19 vaccines. Here's that story. It was just 5 years ago that the World Health Organization officially declared a pandemic for the COVID-19 virus, the virus that affected so many families across the country and here in New York State. Robert Snyder, who authored the book When the City Stopped, Stories from New York's Essential Workers, described the current sentiment as society approaches this grim anniversary.
What impresses me most 5 years after the pandemic started is how eager people are to forget about it. They want to put it behind them. They don't want to remember it. It was a painful, traumatic time. They want to bury those memories. But I think it would be a shame if we forgot everything about the pandemic, because then we won't learn anything from it. And I think there's a lot to learn.
Today, New Yorkers and public health officials have been looking back at the impact of the pandemic, which cannot be done without recounting the creation of the vaccines for the virus. Dr. Tomoko Udo, an associate professor at the Department of Health Policy, Management, and Behavior at SUNY Albany, underscored how quickly the vaccine was created, and that being the roots of skepticism around its effectiveness.
COVID-19 vaccine, as everybody knows, was very developed rapidly. So typically, any vaccination, the development and approval process could take up to several years. This one was really quick. Within a year, it was approved by FDA and implemented to the world. So that rapid pace was definitely amazing.
And Robert Snyder also recounted the skepticism amongst essential workers.
There were essential workers, frontline workers even, who were reluctant to get the vaccine. They were wary of it. They were skeptical of it. Vaccine skepticism has been brewing for a long time in America. It's been a long time since kids were dying of polio, which was such a tremendous incentive for people to get vaccinated against polio back in the 1950s. So I think that strain of vaccine skepticism was there going into the pandemic. And in some ways, for some people, their experience during the pandemic reinforced their skepticism about vaccines.
Meanwhile, Dr. Stephen Thomas, who was appointed the lead principal investigator for the worldwide Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine trial, said while there may have been concerns about the vaccine's creation, it's important to remember that the science that created the vaccine was not new.
There were people who had concerns about the vaccine because they looked at it and they said, well, wait a second, we just found out that there's this new human pathogen, and 11 months later you have a vaccine. And normally that process takes you about 10 years. So clearly you must have skipped some steps, and clearly there's a safety issue with this messenger RNA stuff that we've never heard about. And I have to correct them because they say, well, listen, they've been working on messenger RNA for decades. It's not like we started from, they started from ground zero. They had years and years and years of development time, behind it.
But through all the skepticism around the vaccine, it's clear that it did change the trajectory of the COVID-19 pandemic.
The vaccines were a triumph of science. They broke the back of the pandemic. It's the vaccines that brought an end to the deadliest days of the pandemic.
Once people got vaccinated, the number of deaths from the virus decreased dramatically. The vaccines also help protect vulnerable communities from severe illness if infected and slow the overall spread of the virus.
And before COVID-19 vaccine was developed, all we could do really against the virus was wearing a mask so that we can reduce the risk for spreading the virus and catching the virus, keeping the distance. So those are the only measurement that we had to fight against virus. But once the vaccination was developed, we were able to, start preventing initially people getting a virus. Eventually now it is evolved to the point where it prevents people getting severely ill from the virus, such as ER visit, urgent care visit, hospitalization visit.
Today, most Americans have been vaccinated, and the number of cases has subdued. Individuals with compromised immune systems are encouraged to receive regular yearly booster shots to help protect against the virus. Dr. Thomas underscored that the uses for the science that was used to create the vaccine are endless.
The vaccine platform is like the car, and you can switch out the passengers, right? So they had done studies on flu and rabies and HIV and cancer. Now it was time for COVID. And because of the situation and the planet's aligning of pandemic, lots of resources, people being singularly focused on trying to make a vaccine and mitigate that public health burden. Those planets align, which gave it an opportunity, that the technology and opportunity it had never had before. But it's still very early in that technology's story. I think there are so many other potential applications, and we're seeing that not just in infectious diseases, but in other in other specialties. That I really think it's just the beginning of the story for messenger RNA technology.
And for more information on the 5 years of the COVID-19 pandemic, you can visit our website. Again, that's at nynow.org. You can also subscribe to our newsletter by going to newsletter.nynow.org or by scanning the QR code on your screen. Well, that does it for this edition of New York Now. Thank you for tuning in, and see you next week.
Funding for New York Now is provided by WNET,